Welcome, Sylvia. Welcome, Alice. Very nice to have you here. And yeah, we are Julia, Ati, and Mariana. And we are going to lead the session of diverse economies of the state. I will go through the agenda quickly of the session. We're going to start with a conversation with you about conventional views of the state. And then we will go quickly through the diverse economy 101, and then we will present case studies. Julia will present public finances and decarbonization retrofits. Ati will present reading the state through the lens of difference and performative ontologies in collective community-based livelihood practices, and I will talk about mechanisms that enable democratic creation of diverse economies. After that, we will have a group activity, and then we will wrap up with questions and gratitude. And to start with the conventional views of the state, well, we have prepared a Mentimeter for this activity, but you can also unmute yourself and share your response to the question, which is, when you think of the state, what images come to mind? I'm going to share the link, or maybe we can just share it here through unmuting. You can take 1-2 minutes to think about your response.
Maybe I can say something while I'm momentarily avoiding all of the noises on my campus. I think when I think of the state, especially today, it's hard not to think of like electoral politics and, modes of governmental representation, and sort of like this big, the state to me is a bit scary, actually. It's kind of like this big kind of looming thing. That's about where my brain's at right now, still warming up, but.
Thank you for sharing. Sylvia, just quick follow-up question. When you say it's scary, what does it mean being scary? Is it something like intimidating, or yeah?
I think scary in terms of like, it's this thing that I can't seem to necessarily define, but that is also holds a lot of power and influences kind of our everyday lives in very intense ways, sometimes small, sometimes big. So maybe that's why scary.
Wow, super interesting. Thank you. I'm curious about Alice and also sorry, I just it's Elena, sorry, I think I forgot your name.
I think it's Anna, if I'm not mistaken.
Anna, right? Anna. Yeah, sorry, Anna.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing because it's very noisy here.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. I jot down my comment into the Mentee.
Oh, perfect. So
and I've been adding the spoken comments to the Mentee as well, as we've been going.
Perfect. Wow, we have a lot of ideas. A black box. Una estructura jerárquica burocrática creada en un momento histórico específico que tiene a olvidarse. And it's like a hierarchical structure, bureaucratical structure created in a specific moment, a specific historical moment that tends to be forgotten. A powerful actor. Wow, very interesting views. Any other views, images that comes to your mind?
I like this image of like the structure, and I'm wondering if whoever wrote that one down was thinking like the scaffolding of our of our lives. Like it kind of holds us up and structures our ways of being. I don't know if we added that one.
Actually, I added that because I always like that's something that like I'm trying to, you know, stay away from or deconstruct in my own mind. But like whenever like, at least like that was the dominant imaginary that I always had, like something that like, yeah, it's the framework that you always struggle to get away from, something rigid, you know. So that was my, you know, conventional way of looking at this stuff. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your comments and the images that came to your mind. And I'll pass it to you, Ati, to continue with the next slide, with the next part of the.
I think it might be me.
Oh, is it you? Oh, sorry, Jay.
No worries. No, well, you know, building from all of everyone's great contributions to the Menti, yeah, we kind of approached this question during our community economies summer school, in which, you know, we were kind of posed the question of like, does the state have an economy? And if so, can we think of the state through a diverse economies lens? And so to answer that question, we kind of had to backtrack and start thinking about, okay, well, what are imaginaries of the state? And I think a lot of the more conventional imaginaries we've kind of foregrounded in our Menti. So kind of like a singular, powerful actor, you know, one that engages in like international relations as like the single nation state, something that's fixed, yet like kind of opaque, like we can't really see inside there. And maybe that confers a type of power to it. And yet we kind of know that it's there because it, as Ati was saying, you know, it kind of in our imaginary provides structure to our everyday lives, and also is this very dominant structure that kind of is so commonplace it fades into the background, almost like an infrastructure of our lives. So those are some conventional views of the state, and I think we see these also reflected in theory. And when the three of us got together to kind of put together this presentation, Ati provided this really useful image of this triangle where, you know, I think in liberal theory, you know, the state is this entity, it's its own thing, and yet it can only exist with this kind of dynamic tension between these other forces that structure our economy and structure our governance and our lives, I guess our political economy. And those include the market, kind of what happens in the private sphere, and also some liberal scholars on democracy have talked about civil society, or kind of the voluntaristic associations that citizens make. And all of these kind of exist in tension with each other, but we see them as kind of being theorized as separable entities. So while, you know, the state kind of regulates the market or backs away from it, if you're thinking about like a neoliberal political economy, and civil society kind of keeps the state, a democratic state, functioning and honest, like they still exist in their own spheres and they're kind of tugging against each other. And when we started thinking about diverse economies of the state, we got, I think, like pleasantly confused, because then examples of what we see in the real world start to trouble these kind of separate entities that are in tension with each other. So I'm going to pass it to Ati, who's going to elaborate a little bit on that thinking.
Thank you, Julia. So I think like the attendees that we have like today, they all are familiar with diverse economies. So we put this slide here honestly because we wanted to make sure that we share a basic understanding of diverse economies in case anyone joins us. outside the CERN research community network. But there was also another reason behind this slide. So the conventional way of thinking about the state that Julia just wonderfully elaborated on. Our purpose today is to muddy. We want to muddying this understanding, this imaginaries of the state, and as we all know, like the iceberg, the image that we have, the iceberg that represents the diverse economies, it also shows how, you know, diverse economies approach, as we all know, reframes the economy as radically heterogeneous and as populated by myriad economic activities. So, and it also is based on the foundational anti-essentialism of diverse economies approach. So we're taking these two anti-essentialist approach and also this heterogeneous view of the state today. And we're using, as you can see, like in the iceberg visualization, you can see that we usually see the tip of the iceberg, which is the more conventional thinking about the market, the economy, and all of this. We will get back to this visualization later on because it inspired the group activity that we will have at the end, where we want to think through this as a group and see through how we can also use this visualization to think through different ways of seeing a state and diverse economies of the state. So keeping that in mind, I think we can move on to start our presentation.
Thanks, Ati. And thank you, Mariana, in advance for advancing my slides. I am Julia, and I'm a PhD student at Clark University, and I'm going to present some of my early conceptual thinking that's going to go into my dissertation research. So if you want to advance for me, Mariana, thank you. So I am going to look at the impact of the New York City Climate Mobilization Act. And this research story begins with the passage of the act in 2019. And members of the City Council's Progressive Caucus stood on the steps of City Hall and celebrated the passage of the act, which was actually several pieces of legislation. But the cornerstone law within them, which is called Local Law 97, not a very exciting name, set mandatory building emission standards for buildings over 25,000 square feet in size. So that's about 10 or more units if you're thinking about an apartment building. And these emission standards are going to come into enforcement in 2024. And then there's another threshold with even stricter standards that's scheduled to become enforced in 2030. So this law is going to pass or affect nearly 50,000 buildings across the city, which is about 60% of the building area that exists in the city. And it'll be all sorts of buildings: residential, commercial, office buildings, hospitals, hotels, universities, any kind of building above 25,000 square feet falls under the purview of the law. So it won't be a small undertaking. It's actually going to be a major infrastructural overhaul to the functionality of buildings in what is the US's most populous city and its most dense city. And so in this picture here, the person speaking is a council member, Costa Constantinides, and at the time he was the chair of the Committee of Environmental Protection, and he called the act a down payment on the future of New York City. So my research, I'm fascinated with the finance and implementation of this infrastructural transformation to residential buildings. And my research is going to build on the notion of investment in residential buildings to make them climate ready. And Mariana, if you could move to the next one. But I'm not looking at this law as a simple story about regulation. Instead, I think it's a story about infrastructural transformation. And that's because the New York City building stock is incredibly heterogeneous. It has over a century of different kinds of building designs and popular materials that were used at the time of construction. all buildings are subject to different regulations based on different times of being built, different zoning. Their energy systems range from steam to gas to electric to oil. And then depending on the tenure status of the building, energy systems are also metered differently and incur different costs to residents differently. And land tenure is also diverse with owned and rented market rate buildings. There's cooperative buildings, land trusts, and then a big array of publicly subsidized affordable housing buildings. So if we think about the residential buildings as an infrastructure of habitation that sustains everyday survival requirements for shelter, then I think we can begin to understand the material and the governance complexity of buildings as an infrastructure. So if we think about the transformation of these buildings as a down payment on the city, I like to begin with following the money and the notion of investment in New York City's climate future. So if you can move ahead, thank you. And over the past several years, we've seen a number of like think tanks kind of create a flurry of calculations about what the implementation of this law will mean, economically speaking. The Urban Green Council is like it's a nonprofit affiliated with the City of New York, and they recently filed a report about the retrofit market that's in the making. And here you can see in these graphics, they're predicting $20 billion of investment in buildings in time for that 2030 compliance threshold, and about 8 billion of those investments they predict to fall upon residential buildings of all land tenure types to incur the cost. So these are primarily, what I guess are thought of as like private buildings, privately owned by investors or owner residents, things of that sort. So I'm thinking about the Climate Mobilization Act not simply as a regulation to be complied with, but rather as an economy in the making, because there's products, there's different professions, new markets, all under construction to build the new economy around this infrastructural transformation. And I think when there's an economy in the making, there's also an opportunity to develop ethical or also like unethical economic relations. And specifically when it comes to project financing, ethical or unethical relations of return. If you can, next slide. Thank you. So one diverse economy strategy is to inventory the practices that are present in an economy, and then refuse to take the relationships of those for granted. So I am beginning here with a sample of retrofit financing mechanisms that are coming out of New York State and New York City municipal governments. And this is in no way comprehensive, but I'm just beginning here as a way to begin illustrating the diversity of financing options that are cropping up. So there's PACE loans programs. These are loans that are kind of overseen by the municipal government, but the funds are offered upfront by private banks, and then building owners, if they're using the loan to pay for a clean energy retrofit, they get to pay it back through a tax incentive. So it's kind of like this three-way financing mechanism for energy retrofits. New York City also has a retrofit accelerator, which is this entire nonprofit that's cropped up to be affiliated with the city government, and it specializes in generating information and innovation and then sharing that out. New York State has a bunch of programs that are interesting, one of which is the real-time energy management cost-sharing program. This is run by NYSERDA, which is an acronym for the state's energy authority. So it's kind of this quasi-governmental entity that is working to ensure energy transition in New York State. And the energy management, the real-time energy management program is a cost share for buildings who want to opt into digital energy management systems. So I'll get into that in a minute. Yeah, quickly, two other programs. Retrofit New York is actually modeled off of a Dutch program where current retrofit projects are paid for by estimates and energy savings into the future. So instead of paying for expensive energy later on, you know, a collection of like building owners, designers, and investors calculate how much savings will happen in the future and use that to fund a current project in the present. That program's currently being piloted here in New York. And then this last one, AMEEP for short, is a program that partners with utilities, which are kind of in New York State are these also quasi-public, quasi-private companies to basically create a point system for affordable housing properties that undergo retrofits, and then they get a discount based on a point system of like up to $2,000 per unit in their buildings on their energy bills. So what I find interesting about these various programs is very few of these financing mechanisms, though they all emanate from state and city government, very few of them look like traditional state subsidies, which are just like grants or the state taking ownership of a project completely or offering a pure tax incentive. And instead we're seeing a lot of innovations in state involvement and state organizing around bringing energy efficiency to this largely privatized infrastructure, which is housing. If you can move to the next slide. Thank you. And so what I'm trying to do is, you know, take these various forms of finance and then unpack what investment means for these different forms of finance. So in Take Back the Economy, the book, Gibbs and Grand, Cameron and Healy, the authors, frame finance through community economies lens by asking what kinds of monetary and non-monetary investments are implemented in finance and towards what modes of survival and for whom. So what I'm trying to do here is unpack the forms of investment that are both monetary and non-monetary in these financing mechanisms. So if we think about the real-time energy management program that I mentioned, that was one where a digital system is installed in a building where basically there's a list of firms that work with New York State. A building owner who's interested in participating in the program hires the firm, and the firm installs sensors in the building that collects a bunch of data about energy use, and then uses software and algorithms to kind of, and that data to make recommendations and create insights about the energy use of the building and tries to create suggestions for saving energy. So if we think about the subsidy, the cost sharing subsidy that the state provides for the installation of the digital building system, you know, I'm claiming that that investment doesn't stop there. There's also kind of a deliberative investment between the building owners and the residents and the investors to deliberate, you know, whether that retrofit works for them. Often with these kinds of programs, the building owners and residents pay a subscription fee for the ongoing use of the digital system. So I think of that as another form of investment. The firm that installs the system also has to maintain the hardware and the software of the system and continue to do the analytics to make it work. So I think of that labor as another form of investment. Often the data that's collected through these systems actually is a commodity, a data commodity that can be repackaged and sold on different kinds of markets. So it's actually in the digital geography space, data that, you know, comes from these kinds of systems is sometimes referred to as a data rent, because it's kind of this additional payment that the firm gets to take in exchange for offering their digital services. And of course, that data is about residents' everyday lives and energy uses and temperatures of their private homes. So that's who the rent is being collected from. And finally, residents, I argue, are also responding to the energy use information and maybe changing their energy use behaviors or altering their perceptions of what comfort is to kind of accommodate maybe higher or lower temperatures to save a little energy. So I think of that also as a social reproductive labor and a form of investment that is going into making a building more energy efficient through this, this digital energy retrofit. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that many of these investments are monetary, but just as many of the investments are non-monetary or extra monetary in terms of the data rents. I also want to note that the state financing mechanism can't take effect, or it can't continue to work without the labor and land that exists beyond government payroll and beyond government ownership. So that's owners and investors of these private buildings, firms that are providing labor and products, and also residents in their everyday social reproductive labor. And I also want to highlight, third, that there's an ongoing quality to many of these investments. The state might provide a one-time subsidy, but there's ongoing acts of labor and adjustment that go into making this this work. And so the investment and the retrofit is being continuously performed. And if you can go to my last slide, just wrapping up. So I think the diverse economies approach allows me to understand the complexity of state investments in energy retrofits and the transformation of private housing as a climate-ready infrastructure in the public interest. What I'm trying to illustrate is that seemingly simple state subsidies are actually buttressed by complex monetary and non-monetary investments by a variety of state, market, and civic actors. And these investments aren't one time, but they're rather ongoing enactments. So what I'm thinking with is performance theory, which says that these kind of big things in our lives, they don't simply exist and they're not fixed. They're rather continuously enacted through different discourses and practices and interactions. And I think with the diverse economies approach of looking at investments in energy retrofits, it kind of allows me to see the ways that this public interest in private buildings is being continuously performed. And I find that very hopeful. I think it opens up a space of possibility to ask what kind of ethical relations might come to the fore, and ask who is taking responsibility for making cities more carbon neutral and more livable, and what does that mean for social justice and equity in a changing climate. So that's all I've got. Sorry, that took a little long. I'll pass it off to Ati now.
Thank you, Julia. That was really interesting. I'm looking forward to learning more about this. Okay, let's see if we can. Do you see my slide, or do you see the slide? Okay, perfect. So hi everyone, I'm Atiana Seri. I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at UIUC. I'm very excited to be here and sharing a little bit of my work. So today I want to unpack a case of minority Sunni Baluch women needle workers in pre-urban Iran, and how they work with Iranian state through the lens of Iranian state, and how they deconstruct this entity of a state in performing new ways of being and realities in their collective livelihood practices. So before I start, I'm sorry, I don't know why I went. Okay. So before I start my brief 12-minute presentations, I want to mention I'm burdened by the fact that right now and during the current uprisings in Iran, and now I guess we can call it a revolution, a huge number of universities and schools are under strike by our armed regime. So this space that we're sharing today as academics, activists here, this is a privilege, and we need to, hold it sacred. But during the current revolution in Iran, the state is cracking down on many universities, on my colleagues, and my community members have been affected by this. And some of the students have been expelled from their academic circles, from their universities, and they are under attack by the oppressive forces of the regime. And as an emergent scholar whose work is on Iran and on gender relations, and especially women, I feel I can't start my presentations without mentioning this, acknowledging this, and asking you all here to please educate yourself, talk about these issues in your circles, and take any actions you can to make sure that you're holding your representatives accountable for this global issue, because this is not just only our fight, but this is something that translates through many different contexts around the world. And of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And thank you, and sorry for taking the time out of this presentation to mention this. So going back to my presentation, I want to mention, first of all, why should we care about this issue, about this collective livelihood practices? So the role of low-income Muslim women and their solidarity economy networks and community-based organizations and instruments for poverty relief in global South communities is always undervalued and overlooked. So if you understand the role of these women and their networks, we gain important insight of how we can actually respond to this poverty, and the way they allocate resources, we allocate resources via community and grassroots organizations and NGOs in different parts of the world, especially in global South community. And also it has the possibility of fundamentally transforming the field of social economy from a charitable model to some of the community economies and solidarity model. So my presentation today, a brief overview, I'm going to go over the case and the context. Then I try to deconstruct Iran's state and read for difference through those practices. And also after that, sharing how these women are actually performing new ways of being and new ways of understanding the way the cycles work through performing new subject positions that are not imposed by them. From the outside factors. And also there's going to be a brief discussion, and then I'm moving on to conclusion. So the context of my research is that my research takes you to the margins of Iran on the border of Pakistan in Zahedan city. So the red line here is actually representing the border between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And in this province and in this area here that I call Zahedan here, there's an organization called House of Huda or Khane Huda. So this is actually, we call this the margins of the margin because this informal settlement of Shirabad is located in one of the most marginalized areas of Iran. There are arguments to actually see this area as the most deprived area of Iran. Shirabad is actually one of the 8 informal settlements in Zahedan city. And it is also the largest informal settlement of this city. Since Zahedan itself is a marginalized city, Iranian researchers, as I mentioned earlier, they call this informal settlement the marginalized margin. I can't, sorry. I can't turn down the voice here, but as you can see, this is the image of this informal settlement during the night. So there's no lighting, there's no, essentially infrastructure here. So currently the informal settlement of Shirabad covers and all of the informal settlements covers 1/3 of the entire urbanized area of the city. The people living there are mostly from Sunni religion with Baluch ethnicity, which is considered a minority group in predominantly Shia Iran and Fars domination. These differences in religion and ethnicity also means that they are purposefully ignored and oppressed by the Iranian regime. Because our dominant religion is Shia and our dominant language is Fars, which is very different from this group of people. Additionally, due to the proximity to the border, drug dealing is a major issue. The dwellers suffer from violence caused by conflicts at the border and among the different ethnic groups in here. The urban infrastructure is almost non-existent in Shirabad. People usually use the electric poles in the street for electricity. You saw the image during the night in the previous slide. Drinking water is also distributed through water tanks and is then carried to the houses by mostly women. Recently, because of the mobilization of the women of this community, this has changed, and now the water is delivered to their houses on weekly basis, but this is still very much shows this lack of infrastructure. And lack of proper garbage and sewage system has resulted in adverse public health conditions for this community. But among all of these inhuman conditions and in this deprived, marginalized, and stigmatized informal settlement in Iran, over a decade ago, about 15 years ago, a group of minority women, minority Sunni Baluch women, established a grassroots non-governmental organization called Khane Huda or House of Huda. And they use their needlework craft as a collective income generating activity to provide jobs and extend financial opportunities to the women in their community. So the complex network of NGOs, activists, and academics volunteers helping with this establishment envisioned House of Huda as an entrepreneurship practice for marginalized women through education, microfinance, self-help groups, and also some form of indigenous raskas that they call Bisti, and is indigenous to this Baluch community in this part of Iran. Even though Khane Huda women or House of Huda had a long contentious history of involvement with unsuccessful initiatives by international organizations such as World Bank, UN, and national NGOs, this project actually exceeded the founders' expectation to encompass many more gains, not only at individual levels or household levels, but also at the level of the community. For example, as you can see in this picture here, the women mobilized the community and led the way for numerous collective acts of care at the community level. They mobilized the community against slum clearance, making municipality recognizing their settlement as rural areas and therefore regularly deliver drinkable water, provide electricity. They enhance neighborhood infrastructure. They also, even the children of these women imitated their mother organization and established this group called Negin Youth Group, which uses the same mechanisms of rotating saving groups, and they conduct educational and personal development activities. And you can see some of their pictures here in this slide. And since 2013, Khane Huda, as a registered non-governmental organization, branched out into 5 other informal settlements. A process which was conducted by the Sunni Baluch women themselves as the local native facilitator. So you can see the places of these new branches of Khane Huda. And this is a session through which they were facilitating establishing a new branch in another area of Sistan Baluchistan province. So the women of Khane Huda, in a nutshell, have challenged the patriarchal gender norms through using the invited and invented spaces of citizenship. And they have they mitigated the stigma and imagery around this informal settlement, which usually the location of it would, signify violence, and many other ethnic conflicts and many other social and political issues. And just a brief overview of the demographics of this community. Many of them are from undocumented populations. They, as I mentioned, they are informal settlers. They come from Sunni religious minority. They are from Baluch ethnicity. And some of them are Afghan refugees, and many of them are illiterate. So how come the question is, how come they accomplish all of these things, establishing this NGO here, branching out over to these other informal settlements, having more than 500 members, and under these oppressive forces of the state. So this image here is actually from inside of Khaneh Hoda. And as you can see on the right, you can see the people, the official representatives from the state, all men, of course. And on the left, you can see the members of Khaneh Hoda, the women, and some of the activists and NGO partners from other areas. And actually, I took this image during my field work in Sistan Balochistan. Here, they were negotiating the right to have professional licensure. So how did this happen? Usually the image that we see from or imagine from the state in Iran, especially since the current revolution in Iran, is this masculine. I remember Sylvia said, scary, that comes here, this oppressive force. But how come these women actually made these changes under these conditions? And how these vulnerable, marginalized communities usually penetrate the state and co-opt the state for themselves. Usually we see this vice versa relationship of a state co-opting this, or we talked about this in this way. But as you can see in this image, they literally brought the state representative to the table to negotiate with them. So I want to mention, to understand this, I'm taking 2 steps here. One is deconstructing the state in Iran, by understanding that the dominant discourses usually see the state in Iran as a neoliberal state, but it doesn't function as one in all aspects. So that is an essentialist approach to see this as an Islamic neoliberal state. It does have Islamic capitalist neoliberal practices and regulations, but it's also a rentier state, meaning that it uses the money from oil to provide some resources. It is a developmental state, meaning that it leads a lot of huge developmental projects to bring job and opportunities here. So it also gives the state more control. It is also a welfare state. And because of the money from the oil, we also see a dual welfare regime here that encompasses many parallel states, quasi-states, and grassroots organizations and institutions. Also, the provision of welfare in Iran is very exclusionary, is politicized and uneven through the country. So the area that these women are located in is one of those excluded areas in Iran. So they don't necessarily get the same level of service that the cities that are dominantly Shia and Fars in the central Iran, they get these services. And third, the history of Iran is a semi-colonial state. And which means that the foreign relationship between the Western countries is also international institutions such as the UN and World Bank is always controversial. And again, as we can see in this revolution very vividly, as you have all seen, the relation between the state and the civil society is very volatile due to political and socio-economic vulnerabilities of the IRI. And also the format of the regime is hybrid. Some of them are elected, some of them are always for the long run, and we have external sanctions. So this means that for the women to work with this state, they have to work with these different manifestations of a state. So again, like the way that I unpacked a state here, it was very structural. But why did I do that? Why did I wanted to see all these different aspects? Because through breaking down the state and deconstructing and seeing it in these different ways, we can actually identify the moments that these different manifestations of a state are creating, and how House of Hoda and the women there relate and interact with these moments to co-opt the state, and how they perform different subject positions in relationship to these moments. So here and create new realities. So instead of sticking to the fact that they are marginalized, they are from a minority, they are stigmatized, and all of these, they perform new subject positions in relation to this. So they perform, for example, the religious Sunni subject positions when they talk to the religious leader and how they sanction their work in this informal settlement. They enact their housewife and motherhood subject positions when they want to justify working from home and also getting claimed that this is real work, this is not domestic work. They perform their entrepreneurial subject position when they want to talk with market, with fair trade organizations, and they sort of show themselves as social entrepreneurs to get the welfare resources, to get insurance for their needlework, to get professional licensure, and to negotiate to change policies around their work. And they perform subject positions as victims of climate change and water mismanagement when they want to make claim to the land, infrastructure, and official identity documents that they cannot get otherwise. And in a way, all these performing different subject positions created this new reality, new way of being for them as community leaders within these marginalized areas. And today, again, going back to the current situation in Iran during this revolution, in the same neighborhood that I did this research, actually the government now killed more than 100 people. So they massacred a huge number of people in the same population. Many of the women that I worked with, they lost their husbands, they lost their sons. Some of the women themselves were unfortunately killed. I can't get into details, but this moment, again, this is something that they are performing against by enacting that, like, okay, so we've been doing that, we have gained this power ground, and it is yet to be seen how this will turn out. Hopefully the revolution will be successful and we will see different ways of reality. But unfortunately, right now, we don't really know what's going to happen to them. So coming to a conclusion, using this diverse economies framework to deconstruct this economies of the state, and using this anti-essentialist approach allows for reading for difference and imagining other ways of being. It provides possible alternative readings that aligns more with the intersectional realities of the collective goals of the communities, and it also forms potential. It also gives us a potential way to transform the way resources are allocated in global South communities. Sorry, I went 4 minutes above my time, but I'm finished. I think we can go to Mariana's.
Thank you, Ati.
Thank you.
And I also want to checking about time. Is this session running until 1? So we have 8 minutes.
It was set for 1 hour. If you guys want to go longer than that, maybe I can transfer you the hosting.
Okay, I think like I can like, my presentation is very brief, so I can do it quickly and then we will move to the activity we have.
Okay.
I don't know about what do Julia and Ati think.
We can also get the hosting just in case if you want to go.
Yeah, I'll do that just in case. To whom should I give it to?
It doesn't matter, any of us.
Okay, perfecto, cualquiera.
Thank you.
I don't know. I think I'm not. I don't think I am logged into my job account, but yeah.
Do you want me to share the screen for you?
I can do it. Yeah. I was just also reading the comment from Hillary. And yeah, I'm also based in New York City. So and also Julia.
Yay!
we can gather in person and invite Ati to join us too.
That would be amazing, actually.
Yeah. It's okay. I'm gonna share screen. Okay. So yeah, what I'm going to talk about is the mechanisms, some mechanisms that can enable democratic co-creation of the diverse economies, and a little bit of context or background. I've been working with an organization called People Powered, Global Hub for Participatory Democracy, which supports organizations that are creating a more participatory and deliberative democracy around the world. And I've been lucky to be able to learn about these mechanisms, and also see how in many cases these mechanisms can lead to the creation of conditions for community economies to emerge or to proliferate, and also I think also this is like these are cases that can challenge the views of the state, and abuse of like the different interactions between the state, civil society, market. Because there are spaces where government comes together with civil society, with also sometimes with business, with private sector, and they make decisions together that potentially benefit the livelihoods of humans and other beings. So I'm just going to present some examples of these processes, and also I included this phrase, which is from the book Enacting Community Economies Within a Welfare State, and says community economies refer to the ongoing democratic co-creation of the diverse ways in which we collectively make our livings, receive our livings from others, and provide others for others in turn. And I really like the words democratic co-creation sound really familiar to the work we are supporting, and those mechanisms. I think it would they kind of describe some of the outcomes and process and outcomes of these mechanisms. So one example is participatory budgeting. I don't know if you are familiar with participatory budgeting, but the process of participatory budgeting this mechanism allows community members of a neighborhood or citizens or of a district of a city to decide where they want to spend their taxes, how they want to allocate the money of their taxes. And the processes in general, very kind of summarized. It's brainstorm ideas, people come together, share, discuss their ideas for projects based on the needs that they have identified in where they live. They develop proposals, they kind of start to make their ideas into more feasible proposals, and then they vote and on the projects they want to see funded, and then the projects that get funded and they get implemented. And I found it's very interesting, if people come together from the same for example neighborhood, they start to talk about common needs, and it seems to me a starting point to build spaces or conditions that will benefit all of them. So kind of similar to an example that comes to my mind of community economy is the commons. This is a ballot of a participatory budgeting process in Vallejo, California. And if you can see, there are a lot of ideas or proposals that are commons: outdoor fitness equipment, tennis facilities, parks and recreation improvements, community gardens. Added the quote, the practice of commoning is key to building community economies and negotiating ways of surviving well with each other and with other species in the planet. And it's very interesting. There's a conference happening in France next this December, and there's a talk about these processes with non-human beings, which I'm super interesting to hear. And then the climate assemblies are another deliberative democracy process where citizens, randomly selected citizens, are invited to participate in these assemblies, and the process is quite long. It's kind of 6 to 9 months long. And during this process, they bring experts, they bring people in academia, scientists, regular citizens. Like they try to be very diverse, and the selection of the participants. There's also private sector, I think, participates, but they have like a kind of big number of conversations, and the idea is that they end up making recommendations for policymakers. And this is like related to climate, in the case of climate assemblies. And this is a photo, like an image of 2 projects that were selected from Scotland's climate assembly, which are resource libraries and single-use plastic ban. So kind of citizens, government, and others participating in decision-making of policies and regulations. And yeah, like just including what both of another approach is to try to minimize what we need materially by sharing with other people. This is from Take Back the Economy, one strategy that it's included. I think it was, I don't remember which section of Take Back the Economy. I think it was work or finance. Yeah, so that's another example. And the last example is participatory policymaking. And this is an example of a participatory process where in Senegal, like citizens, creating a startup act that benefits Senegalese startups. And well, you can see like which was the outcome, like easier access to information, reduced taxes, grants and loans for startups. So kind of this can fit into the diversity of enterprise to like small businesses, and like ways they kind of, it's like benefit like citizens and their, the way they can survive together. And you can also see like it took like more than a year, more than 1,000 citizens engaged, more than 50 co-creation activities, a lot of iterations, and I'm gonna just present the process, how it looks, and the moments, like there could be an opportunity to like identify moments where the SP of the state is challenged, like jury mapping, policy hackathon, stakeholder workshop, co-creation committee. And just to wrap up, I was recently in a panel and I found very interesting that there was a question of what's the cost of deliberative and participatory democracy. There's a lot of conversations about convincing decision makers to include these mechanisms, and how there's like a lot of resistance because they find it very costly. And there's like this kind of training or kind of ways that like advocates can convince decision makers, but it's more about, you can buy, like get more popularity, you can get to know your constituents. But someone mentioned that ask a question: what is the cost of not implementing these mechanisms? And like there are costs that are beyond monetary costs, that relates to lives. For example, there was one research brief that was created about the impacts of participatory budgeting, and there are a lot of impacts related to lower infant mortality with these mechanisms, or like literacy among community leaders has great impact on well-being. So there are like impacts that are gains, but are not exactly monetary or financial. That I just wanted to bring that to I found it was related to Julia's presentation about also the return, the investments, and how it's not like always monetary. But I'm gonna stop there. We're gonna have the activity, and I'll pass it to Ati. And thank you, Anna, for the recommendation in the chat.
Thank you, Mariana. It was really interesting. I have questions after we do that activity, but
Yeah,
do you want to go please to the next slide?
I just, is the exercise very long?
No, no, it's very, very short.
Okay, so I'll do the exercise and I'll leave because otherwise me van a matar aquí.
Yeah, yeah.
Someone's gonna kill me here otherwise. I don't want to die this young.
We don't want that.
Sure. Thank you for sticking around. So
Sure.
basically, in the beginning, when we talked about the iceberg and we said that we want to come back here, we were thinking that that conventional view of the state that we see, that triangle of the state, market, and civil society, that is sort of the imaginary that we have as the tip of the iceberg. Right, and like underneath that iceberg, even though it is still part and materiality of the iceberg, it's not like something else, but we can see like a lot of mixing and modding, the ways, the relationship that challenge this imaginary, right? So we were thinking that together maybe we can come up about like some examples, some relationships that actually challenge that like way of like conventional thinking, and we're hoping that the cases that we came up with challenge this idea of like there are different relations that we need to consider that, you know, that can muddy those conventional views of a state. So like if you have like any examples or any comments on this, any thoughts, so this is basically the activity to think about like underneath the iceberg of this conventional view of what's happening. Mariana, I think that
I want to say something. This morning, I was at another session at Liviana
Mhm.
that a colleague of mine put together. His name is David Burin, and he's worked with communities in the city of Rosario, Argentina, with this image of the iceberg, and he presented on that. But while in the session, we discussed that even though the iceberg is a good way to start, for some communities and some issues you want to discuss, you may need to create maybe a different image. And some people at the Community Economies network have already done this in other places. And as you spoke in your presentations, I have to say that I find it very difficult to use the iceberg to respond to your question. Maybe it's because I'm influenced by this morning's chat. So maybe that you need to take into account. But on the other hand, I think it's a great exercise, what you're asking us to do. On the other hand, I would have a hard time doing this. So it would, I cannot come up with something else now. I'll think about it though, I promise. But I think it's very interesting, and I'm so very sorry I have to go, and it's great having been here, and let's keep in touch. Send me an email because I'd like to keep in touch, okay?
yes,
Because
thank you.
at a different point in my life, many years ago, I coordinated a big network and we studied participatory policies in Argentina. And so, yeah, so there's lots I could discuss with you.
There is a
I
lot
don't
of
have
great
the time.
work in Argentina. Yeah, about participatory democracy. Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Gracias a
joining
ustedes.
us. Thank you.
And
Gracias.
don't forget to end the video when you leave. IT is the host,
Yes,
because otherwise the video keeps on going.
yeah, sure.
Okay.
Gracias.
Good.
Chao,
Thank
chao.
you.
Gracias.
Hasta luego.
Bye.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So I do have to go also, but one thing that came to mind really quickly was infrastructure. You know, at least in the context of the US, I mean, there's so much public infrastructure, right? Like roads, train systems have been nationalized in a way. But I think when it comes to, I guess, particularly road infrastructure, the people who actually build the infrastructure are private sector workers. Though it's largely public, or I don't know, probably fully publicly funded. So that's, I don't know, that's an example that comes to mind of this, like something that seems like it's a public works project, but that extends far beyond the public sector in many ways.
Interesting. I'm thinking about like that. I don't know if you've read People as Infrastructure and that whole idea of, you know, having this, like, is it just rules or is it like people like connecting these, especially like in global South communities?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a completely, that's a whole different aspect of this infrastructure as a diverse economic practice, shall we say.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Ati, are you based in Chicago? I mean, in Illinois?
So right now I'm in California, but I go back and forth between Illinois and here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
How come?
Well, I'm based in New York, and I
Oh,
know
okay.
that two of you are in New York. It would be really amazing to meet up in person, but if that's not possible, we should definitely connect further.
Yeah, I'm already jealous.
We'll have to FaceTime you in, Auntie.
Yeah. Please do. I drink my
Okay.
coffee on the side.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your presentations. They were great.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks for
Thank you for
attending.
joining.
Of course.
Yeah, looking
Um,
forward to
yeah.
talk more.
Yeah, same. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Have a nice rest of the day.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was great to